Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's keynote and commentary desk, Anatomy of an Online Attack, brought to you by the Dark Reading virtual event and broadcast by UBM. Additionally, our post-keynote commentary desk is sponsored by BMC Software. I'm Tim Wilson, Editor-in-Chief of Dark Reading, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides by clicking below the media player. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. You can submit questions by typing into the Q&A window, and someone will follow up with you. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please type your issue into the Q&A text area, and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. And now on to our presentation, Anatomy of an Online Attack. I'm really excited today to have with us Rob Karras from the Department of Homeland Security. Rob, I'm going to give you a full bio, but I'll just tell you why I'm excited. Rob is one of the leading penetration testers at DHS, and he's going to walk us through the way he approaches a pen test, which is roughly analogous to what we would see from an attacker. I would encourage you to take a close look and follow along because these are the methods that we're probably seeing from the attackers that approach your enterprise. So I'm really looking forward to this. By way of background, Rob is the Director of National Cybersecurity Assessments and Technical Services, NCATS, at the Department of Homeland Security. He came there in 2010 to create the first ever red team for the federal government. With over 22 years in the information security field and significant experience in creating pen testing and security teams. At DHS, he directs the NCATS program, which conducts vulnerability scanning and penetration testing for the federal government, state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, as well as the private sector and critical infrastructure stakeholders. Prior to DHS, he worked in the private sector for 12 years, developing security operations and pen testing teams, and he worked 5 years at DISA, where he helped originate the Automated System Security Incident Support Team and the Vulnerability Analysis and Assistance Program. He went to James Madison and is a fellow Virginia college attendee, so I'll give him a shout out for that. So with that, Rob, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'll let you kind of talk us through what you have for us today.
Hi, Rob, if you could come off of mute.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you for the introduction. And as was said, I've been in the information security field for over 22, 23 years, mainly all doing penetration testing. So I started at DISA back in the early 90s when there was no such thing as penetration testing, and we wrote a manual in phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of breaking in, took that out to the commercial world, and then ended up at DHS when I found out that there was a red team, but it was mainly comprised in the military. The Air Force had one, Army had one, NSA had one, but there was no civilian red team, and there was a challenge said that there needs to be a red team for the federal government. So I came to DHS in 2010 and created a red team. I'll tell you about the couple services that we have, and then some of the experiences that we've done and how we approach a penetration test and some of the successes that we've had. And then I'll talk about the threats and tell you about some of our expanding capabilities and where I think red teaming is going to be going in the future, and how to help and defend against penetration testers and adversaries that are actually breaking into networks. So what we do at NCATS is we offer full scope red team penetration testing capabilities. So what that means is if somebody signs up for a penetration test, We just don't run a vulnerability scanner and then just give you a report. We actually look at your system pretty detailed. We put exploits onto your box, and we try to elevate privileges to get access to some key that you want us to get to, whether it's a database, a data storage, or some unauthorized access. How we do it, though, is a little bit different. We work with our customers, so the customer knows exactly what we're doing every step of the way. So it's not like you sign up for a penetration test or risk and vulnerability assessment from us, and then we go dark for a week or 2 or 3 and come back and say, here's your results. Everything we do is open and transparent. We have a technical point of contact that we work with and say, hey, we're starting a phishing campaign, and this is what we want to do. This is the phishing email that we're going to send out. Do you guys authorize it? Everything that we do is tailored because we know everybody's environment's different. Some people might not have web applications, or they might not have databases. They only might have a wireless site on site that they allow for their guests to come and use. So we'll come and we'll use that, and we'll test that, and we tailor it for each individual. So it's, there's a lot of services, but the customer gets to choose it, what service they want, and then we work with them to make it a valuable lesson for them. The big thing out of this, and what I want you guys to get out of it is how we attack, but also why we're doing this. You know, anybody can do a penetration test and break into a network, but why we do it is there's not one person or one agency or one company that I know of that can take all the data and put it into one spot and then come out with trending analysis. So I've been here 6 years. The first 2 years was getting the service up and running and getting all the logistics out of the way, the network up and running, all the internal stuff that you have to do within government to get a network and tools running. But now we're starting to get a lot of data. So in the last 3 years, we've tested 27 stakeholders, 39 stakeholders, 50 stakeholders, and this year we're going to be close to over 100 penetration tests. What that means is we finally have these results. We can analyze, look at it, and say, hey, these are the developing trends, and this is what we're seeing. This is how we're getting in, and this is where people are weak. We read all these articles, and we see all these articles, and most of them are spot on, but I wanted hard proof of what we're saying and what we're doing and what we're reporting. I have hard, cold facts to back up everything that we're talking about. So some of the stakeholder groups, just before I get into it, everybody's almost a stakeholder to us. We service the entire federal civilian government agencies. We work with state and local and tribal territorial governments, and then some private sectors, such as the energy sector, financial sector, chemical sector. They're our customers, and we're only working with unclassified networks. So anything that's business sensitive or unclassified is our target area. And there you see some of the statistics of our cyber hygiene service, which is basically an automated vulnerability scan that we do. So we have 283 customers now, and we've detected over a couple 100,000 vulnerabilities, and we've helped the customers mitigate over a couple 100,000 vulnerabilities. And you can see how many stakeholders we've added through the year. I think this is the first line of defense. We're looking at people's perimeters, and if you don't have your perimeter security set up right, there's no way you're going to have your internal security set up right, and you're not going to be able to protect your database or data storage or whatever medical research is valuable to you. So you can see how many stakeholders we've grown with the risk and vulnerability service and the cyber hygiene service. And as we continue this, we continue to grow, and we're continuing to get statistics. We put out an annual report every year that highlights some of the local trends across the industry and how people have SSL misconfigurations or web configurations, and it kind of puts the idea out there that, hey, if these people have it, I probably have it. I should go check and make sure that I'm not vulnerable to these things. So the meat and the potatoes of what our service is penetration testing. where we just try to break into you from either the outside, or you'll invite us to come onto the inside, and we'll do penetration testing on the inside. Social engineering. We currently offer phishing, so we'll craft emails and target it and send it to users. There's a lot of different details and different types of phishing emails that we could send, different sophistication levels, and it just depends what the customer is looking for. Wireless discovery and identification will come on site to a customer site, walk around with some Fluke devices and other devices, and identify how many wireless networks are in your work area, work with you to determine if they're your wireless devices, whether they're secure or not, and help you secure them if they are yours. Web application testing and scanning is probably one of our biggest ones. Everybody has a web presence out there. And if you don't, you're hiring somebody else out there to have a web presence for you, and it's a service that's available. So that's what attackers are going after. So if you have a service that's available, a web application or a mail service, it's opening up a door for hackers to come in. And then the last couple things are database scanning and operating system scanning. They're basically like health checks to see if you have basic security set on your operating systems and your databases, if you have good, strong passwords, strong patching on them, and stuff like that. So I talked about the risk and vulnerability assessment testing. That's our penetration testing, where we break into things. I want to just take a couple minutes and go back to our cyber hygiene scanning. And why this is really important is because if you don't have a grasp on your vulnerabilities and your external systems and how they appear to external people, there's no way you're going to be able to grasp the same thing that you're doing on the inside. Back in 2014, when Heartbleed came out, we were the only agency that was able to identify any systems that had the Heartbleed issue out on the entire .gov. There were about 384 systems that were susceptible to Heartbleed, and in 2 weeks, the entire government had 99% of those fixed, which is pretty good for the federal government. We don't typically act fast on things, but the reaction on this was great to see, and people are seeing and understanding the value of this. So there's an actual memo that came out that affects federal government agencies. It's OMB Memo M1501. It says every federal agency should sign up for our cyber hygiene service, and then the DHS binding operational directive makes all agencies fix critical vulnerabilities within a certain time frame, and that time frame is 30 days, which is fantastic because prior to those directives, there were systems out there that had critical vulnerabilities that were 300, 400, 500 days old, which in cyber security is just an ancient amount of time. One more slide to show you about the breadth of our cyber hygiene. This is a slide, and it's a dashboard that we have that shows where we're currently scanning and where our customers are at. And so any time in point, we could see how our cyber hygiene scanning is going across the United States. So now let me get into some examples of our penetration testing, of what we have identified and what we found, and then I'll get more into how we do it. So the network scanning that we do, I was at one customer site, and they had an incident. They were breached, and they called us in. This was many years ago, and I brought some tools down. It was just me. They called on the phone. They said, "Oh, we only have like 400, 500 systems." So I got down there. I said, "I could handle this." Went down there, and they said, "Oh, no, we were wrong. We have about 800 systems. Do you still need to call anybody to help you out?" And I was like, "No, I can handle this." So one of the first things that we do is when we do penetration testing and when we do any kind of investigation is get a lay of the land. So I wanted to get a network map and identify how many systems were on the network, how many Windows boxes they had, how many servers they had, how many Linux boxes, routers, whatever, so I can kind of try to figure out in my head where I was going to start. So I hooked up my laptop and I started a nice Nmap session, which is a network mapping, which identifies hosts on the network. And when I was done mapping the network, they had actually it was like 7,700 hosts on the network. So these people didn't even have a clue or understanding of how big or how vast their network was. I think that's one of the reasons that it led to a compromise, because it was 90% bigger than the people had thought. When I talked to the CIO and CISO, they were pretty shocked. They didn't know that these different networks or portions of the company weren't segmented off, and it led to some nice data discovery for them and some issues that they had to go on and fix. Another test that I was at, we were doing a penetration test, and it was a pretty big company, and they were doing a lot of medical research and stuff. So physical security was really, really important to them. They had trucks coming in and out. They had different labs that people could go in and out. Well, they had a great guard station with cameras, and the guards were watching everything and watching the access control. But anybody that was a employee could log into the camera system, because it had a default username and password to the camera system. So we showed them that, and they fixed it. But still, if anybody wanted to, they could have changed the password, or they could have watched the cameras and watch people put their pins in to access certain rooms, or actually scarf and watch people put in passwords. Application tests, I want to talk about two of them there. You'll see one at the bottom. The one at the bottom's the really crazy one. And this just goes into people not following logic. A lot of the vulnerabilities that we identify, we don't have to really work hard. They're just configuration issues, or issues people didn't think of or value, or they set it up one time and they forgot. But there was an application, and it was a web server out on the outside that had a password reset function, and the password reset function could be mailed to any email address, any valid email address. So if I knew your username, I would put your username in, and I would put my email address in, robkarras@dhs.gov, and the password reset link would come to me. Then I'd be able to access your account. From there, the web app wasn't built that strong. I'd be able to do some injections and get into some other accounts. But the main thing is nobody checked the logic on the password reset function. It was built about 8 years ago. Somebody thought it was great and it was operational, and nobody did the due diligence to verify and say, hey, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense. As far as wireless testing, I've been at different sites and walked around and seen people have, we walk around with these fluke boxes, and these fluke boxes, they detect wireless activity. So we're walking around this one building, and we keep getting this high sensor. It says, wow, there's a device here, there's a device here. And we kept walking by this room, and we'd peek our head in, and we'd look, and we really couldn't see anything. Finally, we asked our point of contact. We said, hey, can we actually go in this room and just do some investigating and look around? And we got authorization through the physical facilities people, and we went into this room, and it was pretty junky, but the guy had a Linksys wireless router right under his desk, under a bunch of garbage. So, and the worst part was that the wireless router was connected into his LAN. So now he breached security, because the wireless router was able to be accessed from anywhere in that building, and there was a Starbucks in the basement, and it was connected to the LAN, and there was no authentication or security on there. So anybody that knew what they were doing, they could access that agency's internal network from a local Starbucks. So we pulled that out. But these things, they're not really vulnerabilities that we're exploiting. They're just either people's behavior or they're just configuration issues that people didn't think of or didn't really scrutinize. One last thing that I want to talk about, and then I'll go into how we attack and what we go into is the application test, the SQL injection. We crafted an input data string. This happens. This is probably our number 2 finding. When we do a penetration test, the number 1 way we get in is through phishing. That's probably about 87% of the time, and then about 10% of the time it's just through SQL injection. So we do a successfully crafted input with a data string, and we enumerate web application usernames and passwords, and then we get credentials to log into a web application, and we can pull data, we can interact with the database at that point, and exfil data all the time. So I just wanted to point those 2 things out. So I think most of you know what a phishing simulation is, or a phishing attack is, but this is a graphical representation of how it is. We sit in our office in Arlington, and we have customers all across the United States. And we send a phishing email out to the suspected user, and it goes across the internet. We're hoping that somebody clicks on the phishing email, and then it goes and it affects multiple computers, or at least one computer. So all we really need is one computer to get infected, and then that could compromise somebody's entire domain. So we pretend from this attack overview, we'll say that it's a phishing email that we sent out. So we sent out a phishing email. We got somebody to click on it, and what it does is it sends a payload back to us in Arlington, giving us access to that one local computer. What we then do is we log on to that computer. We run some tools. Typically they're not even tools that we have to put on there. They're tools that are built into the computer through PowerShell or through other stuff that Microsoft nicely put on there, and we'll get would dump a local account, the hash. So then we'll have user access to the box, and we'll be on that machine, and we'll look for other machines that are within that network or within that segment, and we'll try to get user accounts on the same user account on multiple boxes. And what we typically find is that once we do that, we find a user has logged into an account, or there's a box that an admin is logged into, and if an admin's logged into, we're able to scarf his credentials. And now once we have the admin credentials, that's really all we need. So we have a local administration account that enables us to own that machine and do whatever we want to that machine. But here's the thing, it goes back to configuration control and just human issues and human laziness. Most of the time, I'd say 75–80% of the time, that once we identify that local admin username, or we get the hash for that, we're able to pass that through over to a domain controller, because users use the same password, whether it's a user, or it's a local admin, or it's a domain admin. So we'll use that password, and we'll log on to the domain controller. The domain controller is important because that controls the entire domain, and now not only do we have access to one local box, but we'll have it to the whole domain, and typically that'll elevate to other enterprise access as well. So once we have that, we spread out through the network, and we look for such things as network appliances, databases, and anything else of interest, and we get access there, typically using the same scarfed admin or username or password. And we exfil data. So we actually don't exfil the data that's on the server, but what we'll do is we'll generate some dummy data, so some false social security numbers or some fake whatever data is there. It's financial records or whatever. We'll duplicate it, and we'll send out megs and megs and megs of data and see if anybody's IDS picks it up. Typically, nobody's IDS picks it up, and we're doing that, and unfortunately, the bad guys are doing that. So we don't have to do a buffer overflow, or we don't have to do any exploit. It's just have somebody click on a simple email, get them to click on that, and then just use the tools that are built into Microsoft and PowerShell to elevate our privileges, identify privileges on that domain, get root on that domain or admin on that domain, and then exfil the data. And there goes the data right there. So, what can be done to prevent this? There's a lot of technical controls that are out there, but unfortunately, there's a lot of different ways and different payloads that hackers can send in. So it's always like a cat and mouse scenario. So you're able to block one type of payload, but then the bad guys come up with a different type of payload. If I come up with like an embedded object linked and embedded batch script that is blocked, then if that is blocked, I'll try like a HTML application PowerShell that can get through. So you have to have the technical control, and then you have to have the non-technical control. You have to have the users being able to say, hey, this email seems a little fishy. I don't know why my boss is asking for this, or why my coworker needs this, and question it and try to elevate it to the security operations center or to somebody, and understand that there's a lot of bad guys out there, and they're trying to fool you at all times, and just by hovering your mouse over a link might not be the true answer, and that you should pay a little bit more attention to everything that you click and everything that you receive. So now I want to show you a couple of phishing emails that we actually sent, and that we use, and that have been really successful. This one happened earlier this spring. We sent it to it was a private company, and we just told the employees, hey, there's some important policy changes regarding your cell phone usage. To see how that affects you, please click here, and it's part of our aggressive effort to update its cybersecurity posture, which was good, but still, people clicked on it, and we were able to get onto the box. How we do our phishing, I guess I should explain this before. We have two different phishing tests that we run. One's just phishing click rate. So this test, we just were doing a phishing click rate to see how many users would click on the attachment. And then we do one with phishing with a payload that we send to the users. This actual campaign right here, we sent only the payload to the sysadmin and to the technical point of contact to see if the payload would get through the technical controls, which it did. So we verified and validated that. But then the second part was just to see how many users would click. And so we got about, I think it was 14% click rate on this. What we did then is we went on-site to the customer's site, and we acted as a trusted insider. They didn't want us doing this from our labs in Arlington. So we went on-site and we said, okay, if a user clicked the phishing email, what would they be able to do, and how would they act, and where would they be able to go? So we went onto the actual customer site, set up our laptops, and what we noticed was that many of the hosts that were on that network where the users clicked were missing critical security updates. Several programs, several unsupported operating systems were running. I believe it was mainly XP, there were a couple of 2003 servers that were there, but that's indicative of a bad patch management program. If you can't update systems and services, and you don't have a plan to update this and keep up with it, you're not going to be able to keep up with the hackers. So what we did was we also found that there was a JBoss server on this network. We were able to exploit those servers and fully compromise both. They had 2 domains there. We were able to exploit those domains, and both those domains, the users, the administrators, were using the same password. So once we broke one domain, we were able to quickly escalate privilege to the other domain. And it's the same story that we're seeing over and over and over. It's just bad housekeeping. And nobody noticed us. That was the bad thing. The SOC was supposed to be sitting there watching and looking for this. There was no logging, or there was logging, but there was no alerting on this. So even though we got in, somebody should have noticed it. Somebody should have seen it. Somebody should have reported it. But it's also hard to alert and log when we're now using an administrative account that was actually allowed and granted to have access there. So if you don't get that initial phishing email, identify that initial compromise, you might not ever see them because they're just running around, adversaries and my team, we're running around on your network as trusted users. So if you have an administrator, if Mark's an admin, and we're just using Mark's account, there's nobody there noticing that unless we use Mark's account after hours and on weekends, and somebody knows, oh, Mark's not supposed to be working on weekends, or Mark's on vacation. That looks funny. So that's pretty bad. So the next email that we sent was a pretty good one. I think the click rate around here was 22%. We sent it to 675 users, and there were 151 clicks. The phishing, the email was pretty obvious for people, hopefully to see. And the SOC actually got a lot of probably about 50% of the people that got this email notified the SOC because in the email it says, hey, this company's Security Operations Center has determined that your workstation has attempted to browse a web content that's forbidden. So that should be the first clue for people to say, you know, I've been pretty good. I've been just doing my work. I don't know why I'm getting this. Let me call the Security Operations Center and find what's going on. Maybe somebody broke into my machine and was looking at websites that they shouldn't have been, or surfing to places. So I'll call them and figure out what's going on. So the Security Operations Center did great. They contacted the appropriate people who had contacted our technical point of contact. We put that in our report and wrote it up. But what was bad, there were still 151 clicks. So we were able to get into this through authentication bypass, and that exists when an application employs weak or broken mechanisms to verify a user's identity. How we basically did this, I think this was the, let me see, the one that had Cold Fusion. Yeah, this was an outdated Cold Fusion server that we identified. The version of Cold Fusion had a well-known authentication bypass, which allowed us to access the administration web interface. With access to the interface, it was possible for us to upload malicious files to the site and schedule the malicious file to be run. So what we did is we created a file that connected from that machine and connected back to our machines out in Arlington, giving the guys back in Arlington full access to that. Once they gained access to that machine, they were able to recover the admin's credentials from memory, which is a pretty easy and relevant thing to do. So, also, I think there was a vCenter. Yeah, there was an outdated vCenter server on there. So the vCenter server had a Metasploit exploit module, and we were able to run that, and we were able to run a PowerShell access to gain access to that. So these things, and what happens is they happen in a matter of minutes and seconds. Once we gain access and we get access to that and get PowerShell, we log into an administrative console and we schedule a task, and you don't even know that it's being run, and you're accessed and broke into. The final third one that I want to talk to before I get into some mitigations and what you guys can do. This was a pretty good one. So this phishing email we sent out to 3,000 people, and what's great about this is only 8 people clicked on it. So everybody's like, wow, that's pretty good. Only 8 people clicked. People know that, why are they going to check this out and click on the tweet? Well, unfortunately, 8 people did click on it, and we were able to access and compromise their entire domain and network system. So there's a Tomcat server that was there. I think it just had admin as the username and password. We were able to upload a payload, and that gained access for us to the system. Of course, Apache was running on there, and it had local system admin privileges, so we had no need to escalate our privileges. So after that, we spread laterally through the network and attempted, and I think we were pretty successful to obtain the DA credentials. So what can be done about all this? I think I've been preaching this for 20 years and 23 years, and probably people have read articles and seen it, but know your assets. If you don't know your assets and what you have, there's no way you can protect them. You need to know what to defend. You need to be able to keep track of their configurations. If systems are end of life, you need to have a plan to end of life them, and it needs to be on a continual basis. A lot of people just put the machine in and then they leave, or they get an application up and running and then they move on to another job. But there needs to be steps in there to continually maintain that application, that system, or those set of systems beyond just getting up and running. And a nice maintenance schedule needs to be kept and processed for that. And all that leads to the next step that I have on there of network segmentation. So who can have access to what? Finance shouldn't be able to access human resources. Human resources shouldn't be able to access research and development. It goes back to that one scan that I did where the company thought they only had 800 machines and ended up that they had 7,000 machines. There's no way. If I was a bad guy and I wanted to access something in R&D and sell it to a competitor, could probably get high money for that. But if you had some kind of just network segmentation and limit people to the areas and accesses that they can go to, that would help that. I know it's a long-term process and it's a significant upkeep, especially with companies that are already built out and stuff. But I think it's an investment that has to be done. One of the biggest things that would hurt hurt my team and hurt the red team and hurt a lot of penetration testers is if there were timeouts on passwords, and they were like one-time passwords. So our typical way of breaking in is to phish somebody, get access to their box, and then elevate our privileges to an administrator. And the admin that we find out always has the same, not always has the same password, but within each company, if you get one admin, that admin password is probably good throughout the company. So if there was a one-time password in timeouts, if the password was only good for 2 hours or 4 hours or 8 hours, that would limit how long we could use that password. So if we compromised the box and the password was set to expire in 4 hours, if there wasn't an admin on that box within the last 4 hours, we would have an admin password, but it would be old. We wouldn't be able to use it. It would be no good to us. Conversely, if we did were lucky enough to stumble upon a box that admin had been on within the last 4 hours, that password would only be good to us for under 4 hours. So we'd be able to elevate and do what we can for the next like 3.5 to 4 hours or however long. But that would set off a lot of noise, probably because we'd want to go fast and work as fast as we could, because we knew that there was a timeout, which probably would lead to some kind of a log or an alert on your network, which is, if you have a diligent SOC and the alert's set up right, you might notice that, and you might be like, ooh, we should look at this. We got something funny going on here, and you could really scrutinize it. You can have something that matches a defined risk, threat, or concern, and really look at that alert, and then go back to the logs and look for additional information. The final thing that I want to bring up is awareness. We've been on sites before where we've changed users' backgrounds. Our point of contact allowed us to do this, so we put our nice DHS logo or NCATS logo on their background, or change their screensaver and stuff, and it was just an administrator thinking that another administrator was playing a joke on them. So they didn't go verify or validate with the other administrator. They just changed it back and thought somebody was playing a joke. Well, if you see something that just doesn't seem right, you really shouldn't just take it as a joke, and you should probably validate that something's going on, or validate your suspicion that another member of your team's playing a joke on you or doing something. Just don't assume it. What we're doing in my program is we're expanding our red team capabilities, and my thought is that it's not a matter of how big of a wall or a moat you're going to build up, or what you're going to put up. People are going to get on your network and break in. So what we've done is created this assessment called an offensive security assessment. It's a 90-day assessment where we do all the red teaming. We do the phishing. We do the elevation of privileges. We do everything to gain a foothold onto your network. We do that probably for the first 40 to 45 days. And then the next 40 to 45 days, we start working with your technical point of contact to start creating, to check metrics. So we'll add a user. We'll put a system offline. We'll do things that should raise concern in your security operations center, and see how you measure against it and how you react against it. At the end of the 90 days, if you didn't notice it or nothing happened, even if stuff did happen, for a week after, we sit there and we work with your administrators and your SOC, and we show them actually how a red team thinks and how they act and what they should be looking for, and really give them guidance and say, this is where we put our tools. This is what a tool does. And, oh, you guys noticed this? Well, you guys should have dug a little deeper. So it goes to the next step of actually putting the red team mindset into your security operations center, so they're getting trained in really knowing what to look for besides just looking for certain types of logs, how to do more and more research. The phishing service that we're rolling out, we're going to have 5 or 6. It's 5 different types of sophisticated emails that we send out. 1 being the least sophisticated, 5 being the highest. It goes over a 13-week period, and we'll send out multiple level 1 emails, level 2 emails, level 3, 4, 5, and hopefully nobody's clicking on the level 1 and 2 sophisticated emails, because they're coming from overseas. They have misspellings in it. They're easy to identify. Level 3, 4, 5, a little more hard for a user to pick up, but we're hoping technical controls are put in place, and just keep training, and let's get rid of the level 1 and level 2 sophistication and start working on the other things. Final service that we're starting is threat identification. So what tools can we build out and methodologies can we build out to identify that there's a malicious person on your network or on your machine? Are there certain processes that are running or running constantly that shouldn't be running, and what to do about it and how to detect it? So Processes are always going to be running, but is it an anomaly that shouldn't be running, and how do you detect it? So that's what we're trying to do with the threat identification service. And I guess it's about over, but if you have any questions, we have this mailbox that's manned 24 hours by our service desk. You could shoot information, questions there after this if you want to find out more about the service, or if you want to get a copy of our annual report, we can send that out to you. So I hope you guys found this valuable, and just know that the attackers are always out there. The main thing to know is that from our stats and from some feeds that I've seen, that phishing is probably 86% of the way adversaries are getting on the network. It's our top way also, and SQL injections probably 8 to 10% of the way people get on.
Thanks so much, Rob. This was a great presentation. I was fascinated to see you walk through the attacks and to see the methods that you go through. I guess one of the things that surprised me, I mean, we think about sophisticated attacks and we talk about, creating new malware and Stuxnet and stuff like that. I mean, and I don't mean to make it sound bad or anything, but a lot of the stuff is not that complex. It's you're finding the holes and able to get through without doing a whole lot of really sophisticated attacks. I mean, am I right there?
You're absolutely right, and we see a lot of our adversaries. I mean, and so what we do is, and it's a little different than other people, but and our main mission is the unclassified. It's sensitive, but it's unclassified networks, and this is what we're doing, and that's a lot of what our adversaries are doing. Some of the more sophisticated attacks that you're going to see are going to be more on the classified or some of the higher end systems that have a lot more scrutiny to it. But for the everyday, I'd say 95% of businesses, it's how fast can I get in, and how cheap can I get in, and how easy can I get in. I don't need to spend $10,000 or a couple $100,000 when I could send a phishing email that cost me pennies.
Yep, right. Yeah, and this is very consistent with what we heard from the FBI earlier in the day, that what they see is it's vulnerabilities that have been around for a long time, unpatched systems, that kind of stuff. The things that we think are run of the mill are actually the most common ways of getting access.
Correct. Yep, and that's what. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And that's why I just go back to the asset management and the configuration management, and if people could really get a hold of that, and that cyber hygiene service that we have, I think of that as like step one. If you could get cyber hygiene and get all your criticals and highs out of the way, then you could start looking at more sophisticated ways to protect your network and stuff. But if you can't take action and fix those and rectify and mitigate those, then you're not going to have any chance against the more sophisticated attacks.
Well, thank you so much, Rob, for being here. This has been great, and we really appreciate the time that you put into this, and thank you for giving us a sense for what you do and how you do it. So I'm going to move on now to David Kramer, and Rob's last comment is probably a good segue. He talked about asset management, configuration management, and so I'm going to bring in David Kramer, who's the Vice President for the Cloud DCA Business Unit at BMC Software. Just a little bit of background about him. David joined BMC in 2015. Before that, he worked with CA. He's worked with companies like AlterPoint, Motive, NetSolve, and Nortel. His focus is on continuous delivery, cloud management, and web-scale IT. So, hi, David. How are you?
Doing well, thanks.
Let's talk a little bit about what we heard, with regard to the types of attacks that we're seeing. As I was saying, what amazes me is how often there's an opportunity for an attacker using fairly simple methods, phishing, SQL injection, just real basic stuff. Is that consistent with what you'd see in your customer base?
Yeah, it is, and I think it's one of the areas, Rob mentioned it, that there's some basic things that you need to do, in order to slow down the attackers. And, one of the items that's popped up time and time again in our research and in talking to customers is this gap that exists. And the gap is when you've identified a potential vulnerability or a potential threat, the time it takes to follow the appropriate security incident response, processes and get the remediation. If you think about the examples that Rob used, a lot of the examples he talked about were known vulnerabilities, an outdated, VMware vCenter server, a Cold Fusion server, or an app or web server that had a known vulnerability. Those are the low-hanging fruit that the operations teams, it's not just the security teams here, it's the operations teams that need to join up with the security teams to get a little bit faster resolution cycle built. And so I think it's absolutely accurate, and it's something that we've been talking to our customers about for, quite a while, around patch management, around connecting the operational side of how you fix these problems, setting up new network access controls or new firewall rules or, whatever the answer might be, and tying that back to the front end, which is, an important, and again, what I said earlier, I think it's a gap in most teams' processes today.
Yeah, I was struck by, and I know you guys have some answers here, but I was thinking about that whole change management process that we all go through. You make a router configuration change and no one tells anyone, or make a firewall configuration change. Those kinds of things often don't get documented, and the next thing you know, you have an open port and stuff streaming through it. Can you talk a little bit about how can security and operations, for example, work together so that those kinds of things don't happen?
Yeah, it's an interesting area, Tim, because I think one of the problems that anyone who's spent time in security recognizes is the shortage of skilled professionals. It's hard to find people with security backgrounds, and when you do find them, they're typically more expensive than other resources, and they're hard to hold on to because they're in demand. And so what you're talking about, Tim, is a really important component of just the people management side of being a CIO or a CISO. I've got to make sure that those highly paid, highly skilled security and cyber experts are focusing on threat identification and threat analysis, and that they're not spending a bunch of time, doing manual, tedious, back office type work. And the best way to do that is to combine the work that they're doing on the front end with the operations teams. But I think the second piece that's tied into this is automation. It's in any network or data center of size, it's actually beyond human scale. So most of these changes need to be automated and tracked for audit reasons in the first place, but also for, as we've just talked about, tightening up these obvious security holes that exist in the network and on the servers and the middleware components that the business services we all make money on are running against. So it's a real important connection point, and again, it's one that we think it's just been overlooked. We think there's been a lot of investment in both automation on the operation side and security threat analysis from a security perspective. They just haven't come together quite yet from a process perspective, and we think that's one of the big things that's going to happen over the coming years as people get a little more focused and disciplined and mature around how they respond to incidents. In the past, I think it's been a little too much investment on how do we identify an incident's taking place, and then there's the panic moment of, okay, now what do we do?
Right, absolutely. And I mean, we definitely have seen the security skills shortage that you're talking about. We're just doing some research right now on survey, and that's the biggest issue for these folks, is trying to automate the process so that you don't need as many humans involved in what you're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe you can talk a little bit about, sometimes that automation process is actually a process. It's not just a matter of getting technology, but it's also figuring out how to create processes within the data center where everybody knows what's going to happen, and then you can put in an automatic process where that happens. Can you talk a little bit about how do you bring these processes together so that you can automate them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways to talk about it. A lot of the times I'll talk about the automation is that task, that thing you need to do, restart a service, patch a server, change a configuration, deploy some software, whatever the task is. But then there's always a process and some orchestration that occurs around the task, because in very few cases is it 100% automation or fully automated. For very basic things like a password reset or something that happens thousands and thousands of times, yeah, those are fully automated. But these security events are they're not snowflakes, but they don't happen as frequently, so it's not full automation. And I don't think full automation is actually the answer. The answer is freeing up the smart people so that they can focus in on the intelligence that they bring and the context that they bring, the knowledge that they bring, and let the tools automate the more routine tasks, and then use the tools for collaboration. That's a big part of that orchestration of the process. Making sure that from a security perspective, the team who found the potential threat, keeping them in the loop so they know that the patch is being tested and it'll be rolled out tomorrow evening during the maintenance window. Half of the battle of keeping things tight are those collaboration connection points that have to happen between teams, not just, as you said earlier, the fact that you've got some automated tool in place to take the action, and make sure it's consistent and repeatable and auditable and all those good things.
Yeah, I could definitely go down that path with you a little bit on the the various teams that are involved. There's so many dependencies, and we don't look at it all the time from a security perspective. We don't look at all those pieces. Unfortunately, we're getting to the end of our time here. I wanted to leave you an opportunity to weigh in with any other thoughts that you had. Going as we talked, as we listened to Rob's presentation, were there any other issues that you want to raise that he brought up?
Well, I'll just reiterate one other thing that we haven't talked about, but he certainly mentioned, and I think it's an important one, and that is that you don't just run a vulnerability scan and then look at the results and there's your answer. When he talked about the services that his team provided, a lot of it was around understanding not just the potential vulnerability that was discovered, but the context around it. What other systems and servers are connected to that vulnerable system? He talked about using a tool to map the network and do discovery, and that's certainly a best practice that we would agree with and follow. So I think that this idea that it's not just point a vulnerability scanner at it and then get the answer. It's that there's actually a big operational side of the equation that sometimes is overlooked, and maybe that's that gap that we talked about is where the problem is. Or sometimes it's just a visibility and knowledge problem that you don't have the full picture. I think his example was great when the guy said, "Yeah, come on over. We got like 500 systems," and then he gets there and it turns into 2,000 pretty quickly.
Right.
We've all seen that. We all know that exists in most IT shops.
Well, this is great. I appreciate you offering some insight on Rob's presentation. I thought Rob did a great job. Really appreciate you both being here. I'd like to just to wrap up here with a couple of thoughts. There are chat rooms all over our virtual environment here, and we'd love to see you all talking amongst yourselves and asking questions and talking with any of the speakers that might be there. There's a chat room there in your auditorium where we are now. Also, if you go in the lobby area, there are 4 zones. There's threat intelligence and 3 other zones you can take a look at, and each one of them has a chat room where you can have a conversation with others who are here. Also, I'd like to point out that in about 15 minutes we'll be starting our first panel of the day on collecting and using threat intelligence data. That'll be a good one, hosted by our erstwhile Kelly Jackson Higgins, and some really good users involved in that too. So we'd love to have you join us. So with that, I'd like to thank David and Rob for being here. I'd also like to thank our audience for attending. This has been The Anatomy of an Online Attack, brought to you by Dark Reading UBM and sponsored by BMC Software. For more information related to today's webinar, please visit any of the resource links that are available below the media player window. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. This webinar is copyright 2016 by UBM. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Dark Reading's virtual event, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests, Rob Karras and David Kramer, I'm Tim Wilson. Thank you for their time and have a great day.